Welcome to the latest episode of Trojans Wired, the podcast, which is an in-house production of the website Trojans Wire. We are part of the College Wire Network. No juju, no problem. USC beats Kansas State and advances to the Elite Eight. Now, of course, UConn's going to be another matter, and of course, we're going to be talking about that game. But we start with the Sweet 16, and before we bring in USC women's basketball analyst CeCe Clay, we want to welcome our special guest, Ryan Kartje, the superb USC beat writer for the Los Angeles Times. He's on site in Spokane covering USC. A great pleasure to have you on our broadcast, Ryan. And so really just the opening offering to you as we welcome you onto our show. You're the reporter. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you sense? Read between the lines. Just tell us what you've been taking in over the past 24 hours, both the win over Kansas State, what was said and felt afterward.
I think it was evident that, as Lindsey Gottlieb explained all week, that, this team didn't necessarily see itself the way other people did. I think people were writing them off and, they were well aware of that. But you never really saw that doubt creep in at all in this game against Kansas State. You saw it, especially that confidence in the freshmen that USC has, Kennedy Smith, Avery Howell, Kaylee Heckel, all of them were essential to USC winning this game. And if you'd have told me that Kiki Ariefin would score a season low 7 points and that USC would win that game, I would have told you that you were crazy. But alas, that's what happened. And I think, we saw fully what Kennedy and Avery especially are capable of when asked to step into the spotlight. And I think Gino Auriemma said it best today. It's, obviously you can't replace Juju, but the fact that both of them have reached this point clearly at the most critical juncture of the season is no small thing. And it's certainly, ensured that the sting of losing Juju hasn't been quite as bad. Now, whether that's enough to beat UConn, I'm sure we'll get into, but certainly an impressive win over Kansas State.
CeCe, your thoughts.
Yeah, I just, to add on to what Ryan said, I was all year long, I've been knowing that this team has been more than just Juju and that the freshmen, they weren't a top class for nothing, right? And for Kennedy to come on the court and do what she did yesterday, I mean, they were a plus 19 when she was on the floor. And her defense, it's funny to me because when you watch Kennedy play, I've always said the way she moves is so fluid. It's almost like she looks slow, but she's not, and one of my friends and I were DMing yesterday on X, and he said, we were just joking around, she's the slowest, fastest guard in the entire nation because it's just the way she moves, the way she can get her hands out, but she's just so fluid with her movements. She looks like she's barely moving, so I'm really impressed with Kennedy, and I'm thoroughly impressed with Avery. She's a leader anyway, and now this is her opportunity to shine and to lead. And you can tell that she is taking on some of that leadership role. And for K9 to come in off the bench and do what she did, I was thoroughly impressed. So, kudos to the freshmen. As you know, they were combined 45 points on the floor last night. So just a true testament to the way they played.
Ryan, were you at the Sweet 16 a year ago in Portland? I imagine you probably were.
I was not actually. I was on paternity leave at the time, but
Okay.
I was watching.
Okay, but you were watching. Well, so let me just come at you with this, that, a year ago, Baylor gave USC a very tough time in the Sweet 16, but of course, Juju Watkins was there. I sensed a lot of nerves from USC in that Sweet 16 game. I sensed in the second half a team that was very calm and composed and was just playing basketball. Might sound like a little bit of a cliche, but without Juju, not as many expectations. I felt, through the TV screen, because I'm not there, you are. I'm wondering if you felt USC being very calm and just embracing the opportunity the way it played against Kansas State, because this team didn't turn the ball over. This team absolutely locked down in the second half, did not let Kansas State shooters get free. I just felt this team was really relaxed in that second half. What was your sense being there in Spokane?
You mentioned the turnovers. I was also impressed by that, if only for the fact that Juju is such a major part of the offense that, when you are just sort of trying to run the offense, and especially making arguably more passes probably because Juju is such a ball dominant guard or such a ball dominant player, um, that they still were able to move the ball arguably more effectively maybe than they have even with Juju in the lineup. So that certainly says a lot. But I already mentioned the freshman. I think that was the confidence aspect of it that was most impressive to me. But the one thing I was kind of intrigued by was Kiki Iriefen's sort of response to the way Kansas State was guarding her, and clearly she didn't end up scoring until I think only 2 minutes were left in the first half, which uh, is just not something they can get away with very often. I was kind of concerned for them in the sense that Kiki, was pretty clear about how she struggled with the double teams. She hadn't really seen that much attention before, especially from two bigs.
Yeah.
Sometimes she'd dealt with one big and a guard, but she clearly struggled with that, and I could tell that kind of affected her. Now, Lindsay Gottlieb, made clear that they were impressed with how she fought through that in the second half, and she definitely was better. But uh, I would assume that she would kind of be the one sort of bringing confidence to the team on both ends. But it really wasn't coming from her so much as it was coming from the freshmen. And Kennedy and Avery, namely, they've been competent all season. I don't find this to be like a new development necessarily, but you know, on the biggest stage, and I think Gino kind of mentioned it earlier today too. It's like sometimes freshmen just don't know what they don't know, so
Yeah.
you can be surprised by the fact that they just step up in a way that maybe other players who are thinking a little bit more about the stakes might not have. So I think we saw that certainly with the freshmen.
Think if I can add to that, also remember in high school, these gals played for state championships. They played for the USA team and so on and so forth. So I think they're kind of used to that, not as big as the NCAA tournament, but they're kind of used to being on that platform. I will say regarding Kiki, the one thing that people haven't recognized about Kiki's game yesterday is although offensively she wasn't at her best, defensively she was she was on she was on the ball because she had to chase around everybody the whole game. And you talk about her development, that would have never happened when she was at Stanford. And so you talk about getting her ready for the W and getting her ready for the pro level, being able to guard players on the perimeter and run around and all that kind of stuff kind of probably made her a little tired. But that's why it's so important that we have two-way guards. But I think that had a lot to do with, other than the double teaming, that may have a lot to do with her not being able to score because she was so busy on the other end trying to play defense and run around and guard people the whole game instead of staying in the paint.
Okay, I'm going to give this next one to CeCe first, and then Ryan, you can chime in and add your thoughts. But CeCe, you're former coach. Would I be inaccurate in saying that I sensed more dribble handoffs at the top of the key as kind of a ball handling adjustment from Lindsay Gottlieb? That action seemed to be a little bit more prevalent than what you'd have with Juju on the floor. And late in the game, Gottlieb dials up a dribble drive, clear out for Kennedy Smith to the right side of the lane, got some free throws. Talk to us about what you sensed Lindsay Gottlieb's chess moves were adjusting to life without Juju Watkins against Kansas State.
I just think that she adjusted by running more offensive sets. With Juju in the game as the dominant ball handler, they run the pro style, read offense. And with this, they're still running a pro style, but they're running in flow. If they get out on transition, then they set up into their flow style offense. The thing that intrigued me the most was they weren't getting out in transition. It was almost like they would get the rebound and jog down the court unless K9 was in. And I remember during the timeout, one of the commentators had said, Lindsay told those players to get the ball and go, get in transition. And I just thought that their pace wasn't like it normally was because Juju gets the ball and go. And I think that you're going to see K9 come in the game a lot more and push the floor of the game than when like TVO's in the game, who's so used to not pushing transition. But yeah, I just think that Lindsay is running more sets because that's what they kind of have to do right now. And
Ryan,
to
Yeah, there's a
Ryan's point,
reason.
to Ryan's point, Yeah, he said it earlier, and they're doing it a lot better. Okay, sorry, Ryan. I just wanted to add that.
No, for sure. And to your point about K9 and her contributions, I don't think it's any coincidence that, uh, Talia didn't play the last, I think, 7 minutes of the
Right,
game,
right.
as they really tried to turn it up on offense. So I think we will see a bit different of a plan against UConn. Obviously, that's a team that likes to turn the pace up.
Yeah,
Um,
yep.
so I do wonder maybe the move is to zag instead of kind of going along with what they do best. And maybe that is where TVO kind of really comes in handy because she is so good at running that half court offense.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. It's going to be interesting. At Kansas State, the other thing too is our perimeter defense, which usually is not the best. Because we usually get beat on dribble drive a lot when we're defending against perimeter defense. I just thought that they stepped up really well yesterday against Kansas State when they had to. They usually shoot 38% from three, and yesterday they held them to 31% from three, which was really, really a testament to them locking down when they had to.
All right. We were kind of nibbling around the edges of the UConn matchup. Let's now dive into that. Monday night, it's the rematch of last year's Elite Eight game. Obviously, the field is tilted without Juju Watkins, but it's not as though USC's this little old 12 seed. The Trojans are a 1 seed. Maybe you would maybe make USC like a 3 or a 4 seed adjusted without Juju. So like this is not David versus Goliath to be sure. But USC is the clear underdog. I've noticed a 13-point underdog in some sports books if you follow that sort of thing. So that's a measure of how much Vegas expects UConn to win. And so, Ryan, obviously you heard from Gino Ariema today, and you're getting a sense of how the principals are talking about this matchup. What do you expect for Monday night in terms of just how you sense everyone's talking about the matchup and is anticipating it?
Well, I think it's twofold kind of, and I'm fascinated at how Lindsey Gottlieb tries to slow down Paige Beckers. You know, it's almost an impossible task, if only because Paige is so good at, if she's getting all the attention, she can defer. And that Huskies offense, like, there's a lot of weapons.
Yeah.
There are no shortage of options to go to aside from Paige, but we saw what Paige is capable of in UConn's win over Oklahoma. She scored their first 19 points in the fourth quarter and then went out after 7 minutes. Her 19 points almost matched Oklahoma's entire second half output, which is just insane to me.
Yeah, yeah.
Now there's a reason why Lindsey Gottlieb was not happy that they were in the same region as UConn, and it's because of that. They know
Yeah.
that that's going to be very difficult to slow down. And I do think it helps that you have a freshman who's an amazing defender and is playing at her best right now when you need her to. So I think Kennedy Smith on the defensive end will just be hugely important. And I imagine we see her chasing Paige the most, but I'm really fascinated too with how Kiki responds
Yeah.
coming into this game. Not She's not going to quite have the same defensive effort against her. I think I'm sure UConn will change things up, but Gino made it pretty clear that they're going to throw double teams at her. He wasn't trying to hide anything with that. So I think Kiki knows that she needs to, figure out how to get around that. And if that's not her scoring, if it's just her sort of, passing to teammates at the 3-point line, then so be it. But they're not going to survive Kiki being as ineffective as she was against Kansas State. So I think that's where this matchup really ultimately gets decided because, yeah, Beth Burns said it best. I think she told me death taxes and scoring 80 points to beat UConn. If you don't score 80, you just don't have a chance. And I think they're going to need Kiki to do that.
And that's an interesting comment because, without Juju, where are they going to pick up those points, those 24 points or 25 points a game? Now, the freshies can kind of offset that as a team, but they, just like you said, Kiki's got to contribute to hit those 80 points, and all the freshmen have to contribute, and Malia has to contribute. And as far as the double team on Kiki, it's going to be Sarah Strong and their other big. Now, Sarah Strong she's a good defender, but she's not as good as I think some of our defenders are. So, and I think Kiki can outmaneuver her. So that's going to be interesting to see. And I'm just wondering if Lindsay is throwing in anything different. I know it's late in the season. If Lindsay is throwing in anything late in the season as far as strong side offensively or weak side offensively to offset UConn's defense. And then as far as Paige, when we played him in December, Avery Howell guarded her some of the time. So I'm wondering if Avery Howell and Kennedy are going to tag team her or how that's going to work. So, and then AZ Fudd didn't really play. So it's like, what are you going to do if AZ Fudd is hitting, you know?
Yeah, and AZ Fudd said today that she was not healthy at all in that
Yeah.
game. She said she's a completely different player now. Um, but that said, she hasn't been so effective over in recent weeks. But still, just another weapon that USC has to worry about.
Yeah, I think the positives are, and I said this in our last podcast, is you just remember the first team that Lindsay got back to the NCAA tournament, and it was all defense based because they couldn't score a lick. So if 80 points is the threshold, if we don't score 80 points, we got to hold UConn, below 70. I think that's the target. If we can hold UConn below 70, then we have a chance. But it's got to be defense has got to win this game for us.
This leads me to my next question, and Ryan, you alluded to it specifically in terms of pace and USC wanting to turn things up with a more of a heckle lineup and less TVO. But if you're the underdog, the clear underdog as USC is, in most sports, this is a general truism across sports. If you're the underdog, you try to shorten the game. So that would seem to mean that USC should be bleeding that 30 seconds off the shot clock. Now, obviously, if you fall behind by 10 in the first quarter, pretty hard to do that. But what if USC gets a little 8-2 run, gets in front a little bit, and then you just try and reduce the number of possessions? Anything you're hearing from USC's coaching staff in terms of that tension about pace and possessions that you alluded to earlier?
Everyone has been pretty hush-hush on the strategy side of things. So I'm not sure we're going to get much of an idea of how that's going to look. But, both Gino and Lindsay alluded to the fact that this is just a big chess match. There's both of these coaches know each other very well. They're going to be able to anticipate each other's counter moves to their moves. So, I personally, to your point, think that slowing down the game is the best way to keep USC in this game. But it's difficult because I also think USC is often at its best, especially with the current personnel that it has going fast. So in order to do that effectively, you're going to have to move the ball again, just with perfect precision and not turn it over. That is critical. And also you kind of mentioned like at the beginning of the game, I think the first 10 minutes is, this first quarter is going to be absolutely essential to USC because if they come out and get punched in the mouth and they have to try to catch up, it's not going to go well. So I think, if they can keep the first quarter low scoring, if they can hit some threes, if they can get Kiki going, especially early, they tried to do that against Kansas State, but it didn't work. I think that's going to be the key strategically, but that said, even then, I mean, this is a UConn team that was trailing at half to Oklahoma and ended up winning by what, 20 points or something? So
It's like 20, yeah.
Yeah, this is a team that can score in a hurry. And as soon as you get Paige hot, if that happens in the second half, like it's kind of over. So I do think that the 13 points is a little disrespectful to a team that, still has an All-American in the lineup. It's not like Kiki's any slouch, but I think we're going to have to see her prove herself in this game. And she says her confidence is not shaken and she'll get a chance to show us that.
And they run a lot of motion offense too, and so that's going to be key. We can't be following their offensive players around. They run a lot of motion. They set a lot of picks. They do a lot of pick and rolls. And, it's a lot of stuff that they've seen before. Now, are they going to be able to keep up with that? And then are we going to press? We have to out rebound them, and then Ray has got to come with it. The last game against UConn she did well, but the last year in the Elite Eight game against UConn, she wasn't that effective. And so this being her senior year and possibly her last game, I think we're going to see a different Rhea in this game as well.
CeCe, where do you come in on the pace possessions tension point that we talked about with Ryan?
Same thing. UConn likes to run. And so I don't think that we can get into a track meet with them unless we have open possessions or unless we turn them over. But if you're talking about just regular ball, I think that we got to settle into our offense because this team right now without Juju plays better when they're running offensive sets. When we have to read and react to their defense, we're not as effective because the players are too young to understand really what's going on the court. I mean, they're a lot better than they were, but Lindsay mentioned a couple press conferences ago how K9 is just now starting to be able to read the second part of the defense. She can get past the first, but she's trying to understand what to do to counteract what the second level of defense is. So I think that Lindsay's got to put them in a position to win, and that just means running more offensive sets at a slower pace than we normally go.
Now, Ryan,
I was mad because I like to see him move. I mean, when I was watching
sure.
him play against Kansas State yesterday, I was like, move the ball. But they just kept dun, 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 So it's all good.
Hey, Ryan, I'm going to ask you a question, but after I ask the question, I'm going to just provide a little bit of backstory to it. The question is, can USC win this game without CeCe and TVO being great? I'm not talking about good. I'm not talking about above average, but great. And here's the context in which I ask you that question. We've seen in both the women's and men's NCAA tournaments, these are 3 2-game tournaments. So if you play a rough, ugly first game, then there's the chance that you can really bust out in the second game, like we saw what Houston did. Houston played an ugly regional semifinal, maxed out in the final. And conversely, Alabama maxed out against BYU, didn't have anything left in the holster against Duke. So to me, I think there's a certain grain of optimism for USC in that it won with CeCe and TVO not having their best games. So that is the context in which I ask you, can USC win this without both being great, A+ on Monday night?
I don't think so, personally. And to your point, too, I do think if we are thinking optimistically like that, I don't expect that Paige Beckers is going to score 40.
Yeah.
So if there's some regression there, that would certainly help USC. But CeCe, I've already kind of made clear that I think this game really hinges on her and just whether she's able to score in the paint, especially because just how much that opens up for everyone else. But TVO is kind of an interesting question in the sense that I think it totally depends on what kind of game they end up in. As we've been talking about, she is so much more essential in the half court that I think if that is the game that they're playing, and she can really kind of step into that floor general role like she has often this season, especially down the stretch of the season, I think that'll go a long way. And just, orchestrating an offense that can, find open corner threes, that can, come off screens and hit shots that I think, at certain times this season, this team has gone cold in that regard. I think they're going to need to be able to do that in this game for sure to really make it happen. I think that starts with TVO, and I'm sure she's motivated too. This being, she's at home, arguably. I know she's had a pretty warm reception while she's been here. So, and having not played those last 7 minutes, I do wonder if we see like a little bit more fire out of her early. So I think we'll know pretty quickly what kind of game we're going to get, especially out of both of those.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, TVO and CeCe are essential to the game, but especially CeCe more so than TVO. It just depends what type of game that UConn allows us to play or the game that we want to control what happens with TVO. Now, if TVO comes out and hits a couple threes like she does sometimes, maybe that boosts her confidence because I think sometimes TVO just gets in her own head and then she gets in her own way. So, but yeah, CeCe's got to bring it. And Malia's got to be good off the bench too.
What's fascinated me so much about this team is just how playing around Juju. None of them were really used to like an offense completely orbiting like one player, clearly. So over the course of the season, they all kind of had to figure out what that meant for each of them. And I think now suddenly that whole thing has changed. Now I
Yeah.
think you see Kiki be like, oh, wow, now I'm the number one option. Like this is very different. And Kennedy, I think, as you know, I would argue that both of them kind of reacted in the exact opposite ways. Kennedy steps into a much larger role and has her best game yet at USC. So,
Yeah.
but that's another point too, in which I wonder if regression is maybe a concern because, you know, you talk about before the tournament, Kennedy had missed 12 of her last 13 shots before the Greensboro game. And she has had stretches this season where she's gone completely cold. And this is just a game in which they can't afford to let any variable slip. Everything has to be at least good enough, if not great, for them to be able to beat UConn. So if any of those facets goes wrong, I just don't love USC's chances.
And to your point about Kiki, even at Stanford, she wasn't the first option, right? She was the second or third option. So she's used, I mean, she came into USC knowing that she was going to be the second option. And I think that she got comfortable with that, because she has pressure, but she doesn't have pressure. I'm here to support, yeah, I want to score, I want to do the best that I can, but I'm not going to be the first option. So now that that first option is hers, it's like, yeah, how is she going to react? So it's interesting. It's very intriguing.
Okay, now Ryan, on our show, you might be aware that we always ask CeCe Clay for her statistical preview of a game. If there's one or two stats, one or two markers that Coach CeCe has circled in red ink as, okay,
Oh, coach.
USC has to hit these targets to have a good chance of winning the game. So Ryan, I'm gonna ask you for some, but first we turn to CeCe Clay. What are your one or two big statistical mileposts for USC in this game against UConn?
Yeah, no turnovers. We can't turn over the ball. So we have to have a game like we did against Kansas State, and we can't turn over the ball. And then who's going to win the rebounding battle? Because that's going to say a lot as well. So I think turnovers and rebounds are key. Defensively, on the offensive side, Kiki's got to score a minimum of 15 in order for us to win this game.
Okay, Ryan, what are the one or two stats or categories that you think USC has to hit a certain marker in order to have a decent chance here?
Actually, I had a Kiki number in mind too, but my number was 20. So I think she needs to be even better than that for them to win. But I think, especially just given the way UConn is going to score in bunches, I think they're going to need, a decent 3-point shooting percentage out of this game. I think, especially if you can get that started early, and Avery and Kennedy can maybe combine for, let's say, 6 threes,
Yeah.
maybe even 7. I think that would put them in a good spot. So I think we're going to need to see both of them hitting from beyond the arc. So I'll say that they need to. I don't know if I want to say a percentage, but let's say 7 threes between the two of them.
In order for Avery to hit those 3-point shots, do you think that they're going to be running more pick actions for Avery then on the backside, to get her open? Because that seems to be a problem that, teams know that Avery's a 3-point shooter, so they guard her closely. So I'm just curious to know if Lindsay's going to run some special pick actions to get Avery open.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Avery has impressed me so much over the course of the season, if only because it doesn't seem like she's ever bothered by uh, even that sort of attention. And there was a 3 that she hit yesterday in transition in which, it I don't know how she slowed herself down to,
Yeah.
to hit that 3. A defender went flying past her. She just has a calm to her that I think really, shows well at this time of year. And I think certainly they're going to try to get her open from beyond the arc. And she always seems to do it anyway, even if
Yeah.
teams are keying in on it.
Okay, Ryan, we are really grateful for your time. And we always, when we bring a guest on to our podcast, we always want to make sure we give the guest time to promote the work that he's doing. Tell our listeners to this podcast what you have going on at the Los Angeles Times, some special stories, features, reports from Spokane.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, first off, just check on latimes.com for any sort of story. I'll have one every day coming out of Spokane and going forward. Um, but I'll cast some attention on my newsletter that I've started somewhat recently, the Times of Troy. Subscribe to that. It's free every Monday morning in your inbox. Uh, I would say a massive write up, arguably too big if you ask my editors. Um, just about whatever is most important in the world of USC sports that week. So obviously this week it is all focused on women's basketball, a little bit on the men's basketball transfer portal, some insight there. So always trying to bring my insight straight to the inbox of fans. So make sure to subscribe to the Times of Troy.
CeCe and I both know, Ryan, you do a fantastic job, and it's why we're grateful that you appeared on our podcast. CeCe, promote what you have going on at your Substack and your YouTube channel.
Yeah, I'll have a Substack out probably after the game tomorrow, or Tuesday morning, talking about the game in the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight. And then also on YouTube, I'll probably do a recap video on the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight, and then as well as uploading all the post-game pressers from tonight and tomorrow. Or I already did for today, but tomorrow's game. Yeah. So check it out.
All right. Ryan Kartje of the Los Angeles Times, so good at your job. Thanks for joining us on the Trojans Wire podcast. CeCe and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great talking to you guys.
Hey, Ryan, I'm gonna holler at you later, probably tomorrow. I'll text you.
Great.
Okay. Thank you.